Okay. I'll return the favor here to Leslie and just mention that I'm really pleased among all these other affiliations that I have at the University of Arizona to be affiliated with the Center for Compassion Studies. And Leslie has embodied putting her heart and soul into this, and the center and the affiliates, everything is beginning to take off now, and I'm really just super pleased to be here and be part of this inaugural series at the core. And thanks also to Tim and our hosts here at the core. So this was part of the description on the website that I presume Leslie wrote up about this talk. So how do the power and possibilities of compassion intersect with climate and environmental change? And frankly, I don't really know the answer to that, so I hope we'll be able to explore that together. One of the other things written in the description for this lecture is in a time when species are threatened with extinction and our global climate and environment are changing at such a rapid pace. So I thought I'd just take the pulse out here. Is there anybody who disagrees or has an opinion that's at odds with the sentiments expressed there? It's okay if you do. I
don't know how to judge rapid. I don't know how to judge rapid.
Rapid.
Okay. I mean, I totally agree.
Yeah.
What is rapid? You know?
Okay, we'll talk about that. Great, thank you. All right, so then everything that I'm about to say will relate to this stuff, and then we'll move through a discussion about compassion. So this is the lens through which I, in my work, usually look at the world. These are all the things in the climate system. So the climate system, it consists, of the atmosphere, but it also consists of how the ocean circulates and how that interacts with the atmosphere, all the things that happen on the land surface, including vegetation changes and forests and agriculture and how those things interact with the ocean and the atmosphere. The Earth, of course, has ice-covered surfaces at the poles and glaciers and sea ice and things like that. And all of those things also interact with the atmosphere. And then we have our human influences. We do various things on the landscape through our work, through industry. One of the things that we do too is we drive cars, we have factories, and we put gases in the atmosphere that trap heat. And we've been putting a lot of those gases in the atmosphere in the last 250 or so years, and we're trapping a whole lot more heat. And of course, that feeds back to everything else in this very rich system. But one of the things that we could see too in looking at this system is if we look at it carefully, we can see ourselves in there. We can see all of these very large forces, and we can see that we also constitute part of the forces in there. Because it's a cartoon, we probably didn't get some other things in there that are part of this system, like wildlife and the abundant life in our oceans. And also from this perspective, we don't get the sense that you would if you were looking at the planet from outer space, that the vast majority of the planet is ocean. But at any rate, there's a lot of connections there. Many connections between parts of the environment and between human beings and this entire system. As I mentioned, one of the things that we're doing through our activities is we're putting a lot of heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere, and that's warming the planet. And as a result of that, it's also changing atmospheric circulation and contributing to a number of other things that I'll discuss later. This is kind of a melodramatic or overly dramatic kind of photo that maybe demonizes industrial activity, and it's easy to kind of point the finger anywhere else but here. But we're part of that activity as well, and let's not lose sight of that. One of the things we know about putting all of these gases in the atmosphere is that we can compare what we've done in the relatively short time that human beings have had a major influence, which is maybe this section of this graph that goes back 800,000 years. And this is a graph of the atmospheric concentration of those heat-trapping gases. And this part here, the blue line, is a record of those gases going back 800,000 years from bubbles of air that are trapped in ice cores that we get from drilling deep into the poles, North and South Pole. So we can see that those gases ranged in a relatively sort of small band of between about 180 parts per million volume and about 280 parts per million volume over this 800,000 years. And then we get to this period here where humans have had a lot of influence through land use change and also through combustion of fossil fuels. And we've put just recently more than 400 parts per million volume of those gases into the atmosphere. So we've increased the amount of those gases in the atmosphere over a very short period of time, on the order of 200 or 300 years. We've put another third into the atmosphere than anything we've seen in the last 800,000 years. And so that's what I meant by rapid change, at least for this particular thing that we're looking at. And then, depending upon our speculations about the future, that might increase by another 80 or 100 parts per million over the course of the next century, or it might increase a whole lot more. And we really don't know. It's a huge uncertainty about the future. Well, one of the things that we do know from looking into the crystal ball, and the crystal ball that we have is using mathematical models to try to approximate this very rich system of land and atmosphere, ocean, ice-covered surfaces, and human activities. So one of the things that we know from studies from the recent National Climate Assessment is that if we end up with a large amount of these gases in the atmosphere, in our part of the world, temperatures will go up by the end of the century another 7 or 8 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's about the difference in current day annual average temperature between Tucson and Yuma. We also know, and we've observed this sort of thing in the historic record, that from increases in temperature, we're seeing an effect on the snowpack in the western United States. And in this graph, we're looking at comparing snowpack in this period of 1971 to 2000 to what models project for the future. And we see that in each of the Southwest states, snowpack will decrease. In some states by a very large percentage. The size of the bars indicates the contribution of that state to the total snowpack in all 6 states here in the Southwest. And of course, snowpack is the key element feeding our water resources, which is the most precious thing that we have in our arid states in the Southwest. Also, from the National Climate assessment, we project that wildland fires, depending upon the environment, will increase by another 40 to 300%. So, possibly a tripling in the acres burned. And if you've lived in Arizona for a little while, a decade or so, you know that we've had many large fires, and they have been way larger than anything that we've seen in previous decades. In 2011, we had a fire in northern Arizona that was roughly 2/3 the size of the state of Rhode Island. Also, maybe some of you have witnessed this sort of thing. This is a photo from the Hemis Mountains in northern New Mexico. The majority of the trees in this photo that looks kind of like the autumn, and this is, by the way, this is the summer. The majority of these trees are conifers, so they should look like these here, very green. But these trees died in 2002 and 2003 from a combination of drought stress from elevated temperature across the region and from insect pests that now have a longer breeding season so that they could build up more population and have more synchronous attacks on this kind of vegetation that's already kind of woozy from feeling stress from drought. So this sort of thing is projected by. Excuse me? There's a hand?
I was just wondering how, from this picture, why do the insects increase?
Why do they?
What's the push
So-
of that?
Will you say that again and I'll repeat it?
Thank you.
Okay, what pushes the insects to have that longer cycle you're talking about?
So the question was, what pushes the insects to have a longer breeding cycle? And it's the increased temperature. They can, once temperatures get above freezing, they can start breeding. So we have a longer frost-free season, essentially, in most years. Yes?
When I was looking at that, that almost could look like the forest around Sedona.
Mm-hmm.
But Sedona's forest is totally green, and I haven't been there this last summer. Green and beautiful. There's a national forest up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why would that totally be spared, and something like this in New Mexico would be so affected?
So I don't know the specific forest that. So the question was, why would the forest around Sedona that this gentleman visits be spared from this sort of impact, whereas this impact was occurring in New Mexico? So I don't know the specific forest that you're talking about, but forests throughout Arizona have been affected by this. And if you drive up onto the Colorado Plateau and look around, you'll see lots of dead trees. You won't see them with this redness because they lose the needles. They lose the dead needles within about a year. But if you drive around northern Arizona, you'll see that. This is a pinon pine forest, so that would be the kind that you'd probably see a lot of around Sedona.
But wouldn't wildfires help this scenario? I mean,
Wouldn't they help this scenario? So the question was, wouldn't wildfires help this scenario? So what were you thinking of when you say help?
like the dead trees will burn and new trees can
Okay,
grow?
so that the dead trees would burn. So generally in the first year, when these trees retain their needles, they're more susceptible to burning, but you need an ignition to burn them. And then in many cases, because of our land management practices, Smokey the Bear, right? We put out all fires, and that's led to unnaturally dense forests, which is one of the contributing factors to having these very massive fires. At any rate, thanks for those questions. Climate models project that as temperatures increase and get warmer, and therefore drought gets more severe, and the duration of drought gets longer because with warmer temperatures and drier soils will get into drought more frequently, that we'll cross this mortality threshold at which these trees die more frequently in the future. And then the kinds of changes, we've also witnessed changes with respect to wildlife. With warmer temperatures, some bird migration is cued by changes in the length of the day, but flowers bud and open based on temperature and not so much length of day. So we're having mismatches in some places, in the Colorado Rockies, for example, with the flowers opening and then the birds showing up after flowers have already dropped. So we're seeing changes or impacts on wildlife as well. So, you know, none of that sounds like very good news, but I thought I'd just mention it so, on our way to thinking about being compassionate about the environment. I wanted to introduce two concepts, and many of you probably have heard about some of these things. So how many of you have heard this term, Anthropocene? Okay, about 20% of folks out here. So this refers to the idea that we might be in a new geologic era that is characterized primarily by the influence of humans on the environment. You may have heard of other periods that geologists name, and you know, those have names like Holocene and Pleistocene and so on. Anthropocene is a brand new concept, and you know, there's a whole lot of debate in the scientific community about whether we can really find evidence of this in soil layers and so on, the way geologists would do that, looking at evidence for previous periods. But nonetheless, there's a lot of evidence of human influence aside from the climate influences that I just mentioned. So there's a question about whether we're in the midst of a sixth mass extinction, this one due mostly to human activity rather than other things that have more to do with other climate and environmental changes throughout the geologic record. Of course, we all are well aware of ways that we've treated the landscape, in some cases denuded the landscape, and even close to home, there are many changes that have occurred right here in Tucson. And you know, we have gone from being a absolutely native part of the Sonoran Desert to having human settlements. We've gone to a place that had flowing rivers to where now we've withdrawn so much groundwater that that the river flows underground, except in rare occurrences, like when we have a big El Nino episode like this winter. And we can clearly see the imprint of humans on our landscape, and that, of course, changes a whole bunch of things, including, as I mentioned, the amount of water that's flowing through the landscape, but when the water flows, where it flows, and so on. So we've had a big impact. And so again, I wanted to just introduce this idea of human impacts other than the impact on climate. And in many cases, even if we didn't have any kind of global climate change, we'd be experiencing pretty major environmental issues just from the kinds of things that we do so that we can have nifty little gadgets like this, or this screen and these lights and so on, through mining and burning fossil fuels and so on and so forth. How many of you have heard about this idea of planetary boundaries? A couple of people. Okay, great. So this idea was introduced by a group of scientists back in 2009, and it kind of picks up on some ideas that were introduced back in the 60s and 70s about limits to growth or limits in the carrying capacity of the planet for all of the kinds of activities that we do. So I'll just briefly introduce some ideas here. This group of scientists, an international group of physical and biological and social scientists, put forth the idea that there were in particular 9 areas that seemed like major indicators of human influence. And part of it was to tell the story of how we're influencing the environment, but part of it also was to talk about ways in which we can change our activities so that we could do these kinds of things, these kinds of activities, but operate within safe limits, as it were. So they identified some processes that occur at planetary scales and that where we've identified particular measurable thresholds for processes at the global scale, like climate change, like the acidification of the ocean. That's something that doesn't come up a whole lot, particularly here since we don't live by the coast. But one of the byproducts of burning fossil fuels and putting all of that carbon in the atmosphere is that one of the places that the carbon gets absorbed is into the ocean, where literally it's making the ocean more acidic, and that has an effect on shellfish and other marine life, particularly when they're in their baby stages. Of course, we've all heard about the ozone layer, so we've had impact on ozone in the stratosphere. We've also had an impact on the phosphorus and nitrogen cycles on Earth. That's another one that doesn't get headlines a whole lot, but if we weren't talking about climate change, that would be front page news. So we do things like burn biomass, trees and vegetation. We take nitrogen and make it into ammonia fertilizer so that we can enhance productivity of agricultural fields. We also put nitrogen into the atmosphere as a byproduct of burning fossil fuels, and there are a couple of other ways that we affect this nitrogen cycle. We've put so much nitrogen onto the land, and particularly into the waters, both coastal waters and fresh waters, that it's having an impact on the creatures that live there. So in freshwater ponds, particularly ones that are downstream of farm fields where we apply a lot of nitrogen by way of fertilizers, we end up having these massive blooms of algae that suffocate the ponds of oxygen and, of course, would affect the fish and snails and all sorts of other creatures in those ponds. Atmospheric aerosol loading. Aerosols are particles, tiny particles, so we can call that air pollution that we put in the atmosphere. Freshwater use. Freshwater is something like less than 1% of all of the water in the entire planet. So in many countries and in many places, including here in the Southwest, there's a lot of stress on our water resources. We've made major land use changes. A lot of that is in terms of cutting down forests and replacing forests with built areas like our cities or agricultural fields. We're losing biodiversity. The sort of conservative estimate is at 100 times the background rate of extinctions, of natural extinctions, and the larger estimates are something like 10,000 times the rate of natural extinctions. And then there's various kinds of chemical pollution to our land and soil and water. So these things have been identified as major boundaries, as it were, ways in which we're affecting the planet. And then this group of scientists, and there's been a lot since this 2009 paper that I'm showing these graphics from, about how much people think we've affected the system and the degree to which we're curbing some of these activities. So inside this green line, and we've got our different things here, the biodiversity, the land use change, freshwater use, and so on. Inside the green area, that's considered to be the safe zone of operation. So for some of these things, like the air pollution and the chemical pollution, we don't have good enough estimates to know whether we're inside or outside of the safety zone for the whole planet. But for some of these things, like the rate of biodiversity loss, the amount of nitrogen that we're putting into systems, we've exceeded this safe zone. And then for some things, like the ozone hole depletion, we've gone some of the way towards unsafe, and then we've actually made some progress. So we've curbed back putting those very dangerous gases in the atmosphere that deplete the ozone hole. So again, the idea here was not to get very technical, but to put forth this idea that humans have had a lot of influence, including on the climate, but also on various aspects of the environment through our activities. And also that while there's a lot of gloom and doom stuff that it's very easy to talk about, there's also the prospect of, through our attitudes and our activities, trying to curb things back so that we can operate as society in a safer way that doesn't overextend and hurt the environment. So I want to return now. That was all by way of introduction. So I want to return now to this question that was on the website. How do the powers and possibility of compassion intersect with climate and environmental change? And we can see how humans are, very much integrated with all of this change. And there was this statement too: by cultivating compassion within ourselves and applying a compassionate attitude, it may help us to understand and protect the living world. So let's explore that together. Because as I said earlier, I don't have the answer. So I wanted to start with this dictionary definition of compassion I just pulled off the internet. Sympathetic consciousness of others' distress, in this case, the distress of the environment and all within the environment, together with a desire to alleviate it. So, how many of you consider yourselves to be compassionate toward the environment? Okay, a little more than half. All right, good, great. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be compassionate toward the environment? And we'll just do this popcorn style. Does anybody want to pop? Okay.
Recycling.
Recycling.
Plastics.
Recycling plastics. Okay. Good.
Decrease use of water.
Others?
Decrease use of water.
Decrease use of water. Okay. Conserve water. Good.
Changing the kind of fuels that we use.
Thinking about the kinds of fuels that we use. Changing those fuels.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eating more plant-based foods
Eating more plant-based foods.
rather than meat.
Consuming.
Less.
Consuming less. Okay. Yeah.
I guess for me, it stems from first understanding, kind of like the empathy piece before you do anything. What is it that the system needs, wants? How do we determine what the system needs and wants before acting?
So being empathetic or cultivating empathy and understanding what the system needs and wants. Thank you. Any other? Yeah, thanks.
I guess just the general intention behind just all decisions, and that general understanding of not that our decisions affect more than some.
So understanding our decisions and how those decisions affect not just us individually, but much broader others here in the room and through the city and throughout the world and all of the systems. To put words in your mouth. Yeah.
Thinking seriously about overpopulation.
To think seriously about overpopulation.
The use of pesticides and how they affect the animals around us that then goes into the plants that grow that we eat.
So the use of, thinking about the use of pesticides and how pesticides can affect the foods that we eat as well as other plants. Yeah.
Being conscious, realizing that everything we do has impact. And so making sure that we're making choices the best we can, every little bit we do that can help, alleviate the strain.
Yeah, being aware of our choices and thinking about how those have ramifications for the rest of the world. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that this election, we're listening to candidates, a choice of a candidate that's compassionate and interested in protecting the environment. That's a very broad thing, but it's important to have the right people in charge
So
of our world.
Our political and leadership choices and having people who have a compassionate attitude or maybe at the bare minimum or at least aware and understanding. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things I think about. One is at home, composting, and having that beautiful earth that grows out, that comes out of the composting materials, and not worrying about a formal box to do it in. I just found a corner of my yard and it's working beautifully. The other is to think about, for me, youth violence prevention is very important, and teaching ways of nonviolence and finding ways to sustain the youth that are wanting to train their peers in nonviolence so they actually can earn a living at it, so they don't maybe have to go into some of the jobs that are contributing to some of the factors that were illustrated up there.
So youth violence prevention and creating an environment so that our youth can have jobs that do positive things for the environment rather than negative.
Yes, lead to sustainability.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, I think really coming together with other people and working to make the kind of changes that you're passionate about.
Coming together with other
people. There are a
people
million things to do. And
to make changes that we're passionate about.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think it's more than just getting conscientious about the small and big that we do to affect the environment, but also since it's always seems to be constantly up for debate what the level of damage is, and whether it's something to be expected or something to be concerned about. I think it's important to teach our kids because they're actually much more open to the idea that there are negative impacts to the environment, and they're more likely to incorporate that and change their habits. And continue these things without so much debate that happens with our generation and older generations, because we're used to things. We're used to having bigger cars. We're used to justifying doing lots of wasteful stuff. And the kids are actually very open to learning about the environment, how to save it, and understanding the small and large impacts they can have in their lives.
Thanks. So educating our youth with the idea that they're more open, maybe come to these issues with less baggage and fewer ingrained habits that contribute to the detriment of the environment. Thank you. Anyone else?
Encouraging compassion for the animals that are
becoming extinct in our world and supporting the methods that we use to prevent that from happening.
Cultivating compassion towards animals and the things that we do that might contribute to their detriment.
Like not buying ivory.
Not buying ivory, yeah, great example. So these are fabulous. These are really wonderful ideas about how we can be compassionate toward the environment. So thank you. I wanted to share something with one of my Art and Environment Network colleagues, Josh Schachter. Any of you know Josh? Yes. Okay, everyone knows Josh. Well, that's great. So Josh is a photographer and educator, and maybe most importantly, a cultivator of community. So I wanted to share this take on environment and compassion from Josh, because I learned a whole lot from this particular story of his. In his role as educator, he's worked with inner city youth back when he was in New Haven, Connecticut, and I think he continues some of that work here in Tucson, many other places, even around the world. So I'm going to read something from his bio on his website that he shared with us last year at one of our Art Environment Networks meeting. So he says, I stared confused by the prints strewn across the classroom table. I had asked my students, inner city girls from New Haven, Connecticut, to photograph their environment. I had expected at least a few photos of squirrels, trees, and other forms of urban nature, but they brought back images of disapproving teachers, smiling friends, and worn faces and corner stores. What had I done wrong? I asked one of my students, why are there no images of birds, trees, or even grass? One girl explained, nature is boring. People are what is interesting. People are nature to me. My friend is like the grass to me. Other girls shared stories about their negative experiences with urban wildlife, of dogs biting and birds pecking, of squirrels munching on prized possessions in their attics. As they spoke, my own perception of environment changed. This experience forced me to confront my own assumptions as a teacher, ecologist, and product of a middle-class suburbanite upbringing, and to recognize the power of photography as a means for youth to explore their lives in new ways, and to educate others through their eyes. As a first-time teacher, this was a powerful lesson, one that I constantly return to and has directly shaped the philosophy and direction of my teaching career. Communities see their own world through unique lenses, filtered by their own experiences. Therefore, it is essential that I listen deeply to my students in order to learn from their experiences and to help them develop the tools to visually articulate their ideas and stories. I do this work to help youth, teachers, and other community members create images and stories that illuminate relationships, nurture community, and foster hope, as all too often our mainstream media is filled with stories of despair and conflict. Perhaps most importantly, I do this because my students are my mentors, reminding me daily about the power of listening, laughter, humility, patience, and empathy, and through the process of making and sharing images, they can remind us all. So, what do you think about what Josh had to say through his anecdote there? Yes.
Well, it's actually clearly extrapolatable to, I think, literally billions of people in poor urban environments around the world. And how do you get them as representatives of their country to connect with what we, in other words, we think, oh, environment. And they think something entirely different, and it's very important to recognize.
So it relates to how other people, perhaps in the developing world or the different socioeconomic status, to understand how they relate to the world and how perhaps we can come to some shared values through better understanding them. Thanks. Other thoughts about what Josh had to say?
Well, you don't protect what you don't value, and you don't value what you don't know. And if they're in an environment where they don't have nature to see why it's necessary and what's happening to it, then
Yeah, so you don't protect what you don't value, and if you don't have a direct experience and empathy with that thing, then it's hard for you to make that same leap. Sure. Yeah, thank you.
My take on this is that you cannot separate the environment from the social context.
Thank you.
That it doesn't, that they intersect and they interrelate.
So you
Doesn't
can't
stand alone.
separate the environment from the social context, and they're deeply woven together.
Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, yeah?
I think it's important too to understand that what we're seeing didn't just happen. That there was a whole line of activities that got neighborhoods or communities in that condition. There's a lot of exploitation that's going on. There folks have started out in pretty rich lands, like in the rainforest or wherever else, and then folks come in and start digging up everything, and then they're pushed into urban. So how people arrive in this condition is pretty important, I think, to understand.
So we need to
kind of get to the root cause, because I know many of us are really looking at indigenous people for assistance and help in understanding how to get closer to the earth and how to be more respectful. And I think that's.
So we need
I think it's just important to get to root causes to how things, how communities wind up in a condition like that.
So we need to think about the root causes that contribute to not just the kinds of environmental degradation that I mentioned earlier, but the conditions in which we live that produce the society, that contributes to producing the society that we live in.
Well, I think it's really important that in our schools we continue to have like outdoor school where kids have an opportunity to go to beautiful places and be in the woods or be in a raft or a canoe for the first time. And so much of this funding is being cut. And I think that it's important for all of us to join together and say, we don't mind paying taxes for our schools or our roads or things that are important like that. So these kids do have an opportunity.
Yeah, so more big ideas here. I mean, lots of big ideas. Here, that we need to provide these opportunities to our youth, but also that we have to band together to do it. It's not just going to happen without our collectively working towards it. Thanks. Yeah.
I think as a kind of corollary to that, we also need to think about when we ask ourselves and others to make changes in our lives to address climate change and what's happening on our Earth, that we need to understand that there are a lot of people who don't have the resources to make those changes, and we need to find ways that we can help make those changes all together.
So as we consider making change, we also have to consider people who don't have the resources or wherewithal to make that change, and we have to facilitate conditions so they can contribute to.
One thing that I took from that was that he was a first-year teacher, and he was going into it with this hope of sort of serving and empowering this group of young people. And from that activity, he had this realization that he had to listen closely to them, because his whole view of what the environment was changed from that.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something similar when we hope to serve a population or empower a population in some way, maybe to make changes in their environment, one of our first tasks is have this kind of humble posture of learning about them and reading the reality first. What are their lives like? What are their circumstances like?
Mhm.
And that from that come the opportunities to make it change.
Thanks. So as we aim to make change and do good in the world, we need to approach that with great humility and with big ears to listen really deeply to what people have to say and to understand their context. Thanks. Yeah.
So I wonder, part of the problem is that we've just become so disconnected from nature. It's like something you do on vacation, or, maybe a field trip. I grew up in a very green, small town, and I was always very interested in it. And I look at what we had to study in school and what they're studying in school, what my kids are studying in school. Now, there's not really that much. There's a chapter or two on the earth and pollution and erosion. There's not really a lot of the fun stuff, like the animals and the plants, and really get into explore that and sort of reconnect and really understand it. And I think we need to change something before everything disappears and we study it as part of ecological history or something like that. But I think part of the problem is reconnecting these kids with the environment and making it more interesting. And sometimes it seems like it's nature versus technology. Technology is, seems infinitely more interesting, and they pick that up very quickly, and they get stuff on their cell phone or websites that they go to, and very little on sort of looking at what's the plant life, the animals that are there, and just understanding and reconnecting.
Yeah, thanks. So providing more opportunity in education for children, for youth to have more experience directly of the environment, to learn more about the environment, and to break down this kind of false dichotomy about technology and environment. Thanks. Okay, so I was going to ask this question about how everyone expresses compassion for the environment, but I actually think we've heard this. We've heard quite a bit of it, and really rich and interesting ideas. Just briefly.
This combines what I've been thinking about already, and it's something I work with in my life. With children, technology actually can work with this. But it's teaching yoga and meditation and empathy and compassion very little. And these are all free. These are free things. It's just being able to do the to have the guidance available and the structure.
Yeah.
And it's starting to happen. I think reading and studying about this in the schools where they're starting to bring this in, and it's having quiet time to really think and absorb and listen, and to teach the kids how to listen and have empathy.
Yeah, so providing opportunities to cultivate empathy and time to contemplate.
Adults need that too.
Sure, you bet. Anyone else on this one? Yeah, thanks.
I think compassion for the environment has definitely changed my perspective on it entirely, because I think most people, and I used to think this too in the past, they think of the environment as like a concrete, something that's still, that's over there. But it's also here, it's in Tucson, it's in our homes. And so drawing on her idea of disconnect, compassion for the environment has helped me kind of make a bridge and create that connection and change my life and realize that every action I take changes my environment.
Yeah, fantastic. So by cultivating compassion for the environment, you have reconnected, and you don't see the environment as much as other, rather as part of something that you're part of and that it's woven with you as well. Yeah, thanks. Let me just ask this question about what we can do. And I'll wrap up with a couple of stories. So I'll answer the question and then ask people to chime in too. So this is a quote from Joanna Macy, who I've characterized here as a deep ecology scholar. Of course, she wears many hats, as it were. So she says, the most remarkable feature of this historical moment on Earth is not that we're on the way to destroying the world. We've actually been on that path for quite a while. It's that we're beginning to wake up, as from a millennia-long sleep, to a whole new relationship to our world, to ourselves and each other. And I think that's absolutely what everybody has expressed through all these comments, which is really fantastic. It's nice to have affirmation that we're on the same page with somebody who's really thought deeply about this for quite a while. So personally, one of the things that I do to cultivate compassion to the environment is I think about how I'm connected and how all sorts of things, from decaying matter and bacteria and insects and things that are seemingly inert like soil, are actually part of this huge system. I mean, it's a really simple idea. This is not Nobel Prize winning stuff here. But there's an exercise that probably many of you know that the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh calls upon us to do every once in a while, which is when we eat our food, like our slice of bread, when we look at that slice of bread, to see the baker, to see the wheat that went into the bread, the farmer that made the wheat, the soil, the insects and the microbes and the sun that contributed. And by doing that, we can connect the knee bone to the thigh bone and all that stuff. And that's just at the surface level. We can go much deeper in this, but this is kind of the first step, at least for me, for cultivating compassion. There are folks that are in our local community that are working through their compassion and through, as somebody mentioned earlier, their passion for things that they really care about, that are working at a place southeast of Tucson called the Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area, where there are all sorts of wonderful features of the Sonoran Desert, including grasslands, wetlands and springs, wildlife, these cottonwood willow forests that grow along the sides of the streams, mesquite bosques. And this landscape is in danger of, through the kinds of practices that we've used to manage the land, of being heavily eroded and limiting the ability of wild creatures to thrive in the environment. So what they've been doing for several years now is working as a community, as a real mixed bag of people, environmentalists, ranchers, farmers, business people, and so on, to come together to plan, to think about the environment, and to do things that might have an effect of retaining some of that soil and curbing some of that erosion and contributing to the health of the grasslands that will then have some feedback for those wild animals as well. A couple of years ago, some of you might recall that there was an experimental pulse of water to go through the Colorado River system all the way to the Colorado River Delta for the first time in something like 20 years. And so we've made some decisions about managing our water that allows us to thrive here in Tucson, people to thrive in Los Angeles and Las Vegas and a whole lot of other places like that. But the trade-off is that water never makes it to what should be a place of huge fecundity. So this kind of thing, the fact that water managers and environmentalists and individual citizens and collectives have come together to do this kind of thing and to learn from it and maybe create the foundation for allowing more natural flow to make it to the river. Given all of the doom and gloom stuff that I started off this talk with, this kind of thing helps me get out of bed in the morning. More closely in our own community, we have community members that are working to raise awareness about the risks of extreme heat and other public health risks in Tucson, and to work with different neighborhoods, a variety of socioeconomic classes to increase our resilience for potential future changes. We also, and this was really moving for me, last fall with the Art and Environment Network folks, we visited the Pima County Juvenile Detention Center. One of our members is a teacher of writing there for folks that are very young and are incarcerated. And they live in conditions that nobody in this room, I think, would really want to live in. But let me just read something from one of the folks who came out the other side of this program. He says, "I just came to a realization when speaking with a friend of the trauma of warfare that I had gone through, and how I found it strange that I never sought out counseling to discuss or even be able to analyze or overcome an obstacle that I didn't know existed. Through this powerful conversation, I found out that gardening and having mentorship and friends and community building, that was my therapy. That's what I needed to learn and place my energy in. Growing food, growing life, learning how to take care of myself and build my skills for the betterment not only of myself, but to secure a future for my brothers and sister who looked up to me. I don't know where I would be if it weren't for the gardens and trees that I've helped to put in, where I buried my trauma, I buried my tears, that trees and plants could change and alter the energy to create a positive flow for those who sought our nutrients, shade, and bugs. What I do know reflects who I was meant to be. I learned to live closely with my ancestors in their way. I learned how to be a loving man with my wife. I learned what it means to be a warrior for my people when I talk to little ones with a soft voice, because no one deserves to feel the emptiness that I felt. No one deserves to hear mothers cry for fallen sons. I thank you for seeing the value in our youth. We need that." So the folks in this detention center requested that they be able to garden. And so the folks who work there facilitated bringing in planter boxes, and these people tend, in a very nurturing way to really the only natural environment that they have any exposure to. And as you can see, it had a real effect, at least on one person's life, and I suspect many. So in my view, our biggest resource, our best resource, is people. And as everyone has mentioned, in many different ways, cultivating compassion for environment, for each other, and respecting each other's points of view, and also a little tussle as we work our way through to maybe living within those planetary boundaries and living and contributing to a more thriving environment and world. So thank you for your comments, and thanks for your attention.
I think what we can do is, if there's a question or two, we can have a question. If there's a follow-up question, so we have a question right here, Anna.
I have just a quick comment. I was so happy to see the positions for social responsibility and building resilience. Another great resource that we have is Sustainable Tucson. If you go on that website, you'll see an incredible amount of demonstration of how compassionate Tucson is and how dedicated and focused we are as a community.
So the comment was that we have great resources in this community, in particular, Sustainable Tucson.
So So is there one more question, and then, so right here, and then we'll put a bow on this in a second. So one last question.
What was the organization that you referred to of Art in the Environment?
Yeah, so this is a new, relatively new initiative at the University of Arizona. Well, it's actually a collaboration between artists and scientists, both at the university and within the Tucson community. Because right now our center is at the university, our center of gravity is at the university. We do things a little bit on the semester system. So several times in the spring and in the fall, we hold events where we have readings or presentations so that we can learn about how artists are writing about or doing performance art or visual art or music relating to the environment, how scientists and artists are collaborating through their different ways of understanding the world to enrich the ways that we might think about the environment, raising awareness, and even coming up with different perspectives on solutions to some of these pressing issues. So I'd be happy to take your name, or if you Googled University of Arizona Art Environment Network, I'm sure you'll find the webpage and a calendar of events. Thanks.